Today's lecture brings us into the 18th century, where we concentrate on the movements of Rococo and Neoclassicism. The 1700s witnesses radical changes in both society, thought, and politics. We have the American Revolution, which begins in 1776, the French Revolution in 1789, and most importantly, the Industrial Revolution also begins during this time period. We have three distinct styles that emerge from the 18th century. Rococo and Neoclassicism we'll cover in this lecture. In our next lecture, we'll cover Romanticism. But what's important is that France now emerges as the leader of the art world, and they're going to stay the leader until 1945, the end of World War II, when the art capital shifts to New York. So for the first time, we're outside of Italy and we're into France. And we'll begin our study of art with Rococo. So again, it originates in France. It begins in 1715 with the reign of Louis XV, and it will end abruptly at the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789. Some words to describe this type of art: extravagance, opulence, pleasure, sensuality, and leisure. This is definitely art of the aristocracy. When we look at a room such as this, you can see the gold and the silver, the extravagant paintings above the windows, the chandelier hanging in the middle of the room. This room is alive and no one has even entered it yet. Every time I look at this room, I expect a piano in Liberace to be playing. This is just an incredible room, and the artworks that are created during this time are quite similar. The most famous artist of the Rococo is Watteau, and this is probably his most famous painting, Pilgrimage to the Island of Cythera. And when we look at this painting, it makes us think of more questions than we have answers to. For instance, what are these people doing here? Are they arriving or are they leaving? You look at the extreme amount of cupids or cherubs in the air. They're almost like mosquitoes gathering around. We have this beautiful sculpture off to the right, and it's almost a state of surrealism, even though surrealism doesn't begin for another 150 or so years from this point. We're looking at a painting that is kind of like in a dreamlike state. We have a lot of poetical representations of love. We have aristocracy in sumptuous clothing. A lot of silks, a lot of satins and velvets are also present here. Now, this painting is the first version of Pilgrimage to the Island of Cythera, and this is the second. And you can see it's slightly different. We have still a little bit different sculpture off to the right. We have still a few cherubs, much less than we had in the previous image, but we still have the same type of dreamlike state. And it's a place somewhere between reality and imagination. This and the last painting are fairly large, about 4 feet by 6 feet in terms of size. These are not small paintings by any means. This painting, though, is special for Watteau because this is his official examination painting for admittance as a member of the Royal Academy of Painting and Sculpture. And so what happens is once he is accepted, he gets to use the initials RA after his name, and RA stands for Royal Academy. Another real famous work that he does is this one called Giles, and we're really unsure about this painting because it was one of the works that remained in the artist's estate upon his death. Watteau dies very, very young. He contracts tuberculosis and even goes to London for treatment for his disease, but succumbs to it at the age of 1937. To me, this is a very haunting image, and it's something that, you know, is just very unique. It's actually on wood, and there's a theory that is out there that says this was intended to be an advertising sign for an Italian theater group. We have a general landscape here with a statue of a faun to the middle right. We have actors in the background relaxing and conversing, and we even have a donkey that's kind of laying down near them. But then there's this figure of Giles standing in front of everyone on a little bit of a berm. And this is a person who's supposed to entertain us, but he's just kind of standing there, almost vacant-eyed in terms of his staring at us. The painting kind of exudes this feeling of sadness and loneliness, even melancholy. It's much different than the other paintings that Watteau creates that are much more of a party or a celebration. There's some type of jubilation around. In this painting, there are a lot of interesting things to look at. The couple standing are dancing a minuet, although he looks very much like a sultan. We have figures in the background almost with like a Napoleonic hat, kind of in a cape as well, walking off to the side. And this is a painting that's really kind of dripping with sensuality in a way. Another famous artist of this time is Fragonard, and he's probably my favorite of this age because of the way he can create or paint these landscape paintings. No one ever has been able to paint a tree like Fragonard does. And again, it's kind of a mythical, in a way, type of landscape. Chardin was one of his teachers. And Fragonard, along with soon to be talked about artist David, won an award called the Prix de Rome. And the Prix de Rome is given to promising art students. It is a scholarship that allows them to study in Rome for a period to 3 to 5 years. So it's a very prestigious scholarship that Fragonard wins. And again, it's called the Prix de Rome. This is a painting called The Swing. It's his most famous work or noteworthy work. It is sensually explicit in a way. And the focal point being the young girl on the swing. She's being pushed by the gentleman in the shadows, where her lover is laying in the bushes in the lower left-hand side under the statue of Cupid, and she's playfully kicking off her shoe in his direction. The scene really is one of anticipation and desire. And I'll show you a few other works by Fragonard. The sad thing about him and his life is that when Rococo ends abruptly at the beginning of the French Revolution, there's no one that wants these types of paintings. And Fragonard basically loses his residence at the Louvre and is literally kicked out as homeless and dies that same year as a forgotten artist. A lot of these works don't become popular again for about another 100 or so years. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the Louvre because this is where we have the School of Fine Arts. And as a student here, you would literally live at the Louvre. You would copy many of the great artworks here, but it's also the place where they have the famous French salon. And this is kind of a painting of what a salon would look like. It's an exhibition. In fact, it's a yearly exhibition of art that's produced by the very best students. And we'll talk more particularly about the Salon of 1863 in a later lecture. But you can see the amount of work that is on the walls here. It's not at all like a museum setting where you have a painting every few feet. Here they're literally crammed in frame to frame. Smaller paintings at the base, larger paintings at the top, and of course tables and pedestals of sculptures also present. But I want to take this time to really take a look at the different types of subject matters that we find in paintings. First off, we have still life paintings, and these are paintings of inanimate objects. You would paint these when you first became an artist. The teacher would set out these inanimate objects, and they would stay there for days or weeks until you finished your painting. So even though we have this painting here by Chardin, who is a very well accomplished artist, this is still looked at as a very lowly type of subject matter. And normally we see still lifes as being bowls of fruit or even vases of flowers. Then we have landscape paintings, which would be an expanse of scenery. Portraiture, which is a likeness of a person. Genre scenes, which are scenes from everyday life, and this scene, one by Caravaggio that we've talked about earlier on in the semester, this is people cheating at playing cards. And then religion, along with history painting, are really two of the most important subject matters that we see. And these are also the largest in terms of size that we'll see at the very top, hanging at the Salon, at the top of the walls. And we also have these reserved for the very best artists. These are not available to paint for everyone. So we're going to move on to what's called neoclassical art or neoclassicism. Again, this is an art movement that originates in France, and it's a response against Rococo. And remember, this is an art movement that collapses with the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789. With neoclassical art, artists sought to present classical ideals and subject matter in a style derived from classical Greek and Roman sources. Anytime you see the word classical in terms of art, it deals with the early civilizations of Greece and Rome. And we have new interest in these civilizations because we've unearthed Pompeii and Herculaneum in the late 1700s. Neoclassical paintings were frequently painted for and displayed in public places in order to inspire patriotism, nationalism, and courage in defense of the state. Basically, these paintings are messages of patriotism and sacrifice for the greater good. The most famous artist of this style, Jacques-Louis David, and he was an incredible artist. You think of movie stars today, people like George Clooney or Brad Pitt, for instance, couldn't walk the streets of Hollywood without being surrounded by fans. And the same thing happens with Jacques-Louis David. He could not even walk the streets of Paris. He was that incredibly popular. As I mentioned earlier, he was one of the winners of the Prix de Rome. It took him 3 tries, though, to win. During the French Revolution, he was imprisoned twice because he was really a very close friend with Napoleon. In fact, he becomes the court painter for Napoleon in 1795. Some consider him the first modern artist, and we'll talk about the definition of modern in a later lecture. And he's going to pass away in 1825. Now, the earlier work we looked at when we talked about history painting was The Oath of the Herati by Jacques-Louis David. And we see this wonderful scene. It's kind of near the fall of the Roman Empire. and Rome is having a property dispute with the neighboring city of Alba. Now, the three brothers here are going off to fight against triplets from the city of Alba, the Curati brothers. And this is how Rome and Alba are going to settle this property dispute, basically a fight to the death between these two families of triplets. Now, as sad as that may seem for this father in the center to lose his sons, you can see the women at the right also kind of crying and very sad. It's because one of them is married to a brother of the Curati family and another is betrothed to another. Now, as the story goes, the brothers go off to fight the war. One of them comes back and he sees his sister crying because she knows that not only are her two other brothers dead, but her husband is also dead. And so the one remaining Curati brother, instead of putting his arm around his sister and trying to comfort her, instead he kills her, saying that no one should mourn an enemy of the state. And so this painting really becomes what would be known as the rallying cry for the French Revolution. Another painting we'll look at in the neoclassical style is Death of Marat. And Marat is a physician, he's a scientist, he's a radical journalist, and it really is an extremely powerful painting. He would write pamphlets urging for abolition of aristocratic privileges, and he suffered from a painful skin ailment that he developed in the Paris sewers, hiding from his enemies. And so it was real common for Marat to write in a medicinal bath, which is how you see him here. Now, Charlotte Corday was a supporter of an opposition party, and she gains admittance to his house under false pretenses and stabs him. She's caught and sent to the guillotine 4 days later. And in his death scene, you can see how he's still clutching the letter in his hands, and his writing pen in his right hand is just falling to the ground. You're seeing him just as he is dying. The knife has struck him just below his neck, and it's laying on the ground just below the textiles there hanging out of the bath. And it really is kind of a recontextualization in a way, where his bathtub becomes a coffin. This writing table next to him becomes a tombstone, and this is where Jacques-Louis David signs his work, and he titles the work as well. What's unique here is that Marat and David were also friends, and David had just paid him a visit a day before he was assassinated. In fact, David says, quote, "I found him in a situation that astonished me. Beside him was a wooden packing case, on it an inkwell and paper, and from his bath he was noting his last thoughts for the welfare of the people." And the murder scene itself, instead of being bloody and ugly, it is instead rather eloquent. Marat dies as a martyr, very similar to the way Christ dies. He dies for the people. Here's a close-up of the letter itself. And also we have this work done by a totally different artist. This is a more true to life scene because the knife does stay in his body rather than being fallen to the ground. And we do have fun with this, with several parodies that you might see online. And with that, this is where I want to end this lecture. Next lecture will be about Romanticism.